Hey y'all, welcome to Alliecat Customs. If you're looking to narrow a rear axle, or if you have a rear axle that has some bent axle tubes that are out of alignment, I have a really nice tool that's going to help y'all be able to align the rear axle, and that's a Mittler Brothers rear axle alignment tool. And I'm going to show y'all how I use it to narrow this rear axle, as well as attempt to fix some out of alignment axle tubes. So y'all stick around. Alrighty, square it up, looks good. All right, y'all, so now I got the axle back out from under the truck. I was using it as a visual aid as I installed the fuel cell. I wanted to make sure that everything kind of fit and had its home and wasn't trying to share real estate with each other. So after I did that, got it back out from under there. When I get ready to start building this axle, we have all the parts in finally for this axle build. So I'm going to start building it. First off, I'm going to be narrowing the rear end. Because of the way that he has his truck set up, he wanted to run a set of weld wheels, and he didn't like the offset that these trucks run on with a really far offset with that flat face look. Just don't look good for hot rodding. So he wanted to bring the wheel center in some and make it look better. So he run his nice, real wide tires on a good looking set of wheels, because he is a street rodder, so he likes to have it looking good as well as running good. So said, yeah, we can definitely take and narrow this rear end for him, since we're already going to be upgrading axle shafts, doing a C-clip eliminator. That takes a little bit more work, but then the end product will be much nicer. So I'm about to get started. I already know my reference point, because to keep the axle centered in the truck, you want to know where the spring purchase need to mount center-wise to keep everything lined up. So I know my reference point for here to my spring purchase. So I'm about to start marking things up, because I needed to get some extra reference points on this, because I will be messing up my first reference point, because I will be doing welding the housing to the tube. So this won't be a reliable reference point when I'm done. It may not be. So I want to make sure to have a new reference point to measure from. And that way I can do this step and move on back to cutting axle tube. So let's get started. All right, so we were going to narrow this axle 1 1/8 inches on both sides. So we went ahead and ordered a new set of axle shafts, and I wanted to make sure that they were the correct length. So I measured both shafts from the end of the flange where the wheel bolt's on to the end of the shaft. And on the old C-clip style shaft, I measured to the end of the splines, and the new shaft is in fact 1 1/8 inches shorter. So the next thing I did was measure where the center of the spring perch goes on this axle. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the axle in the center where the spring perch is, because once I weld the axle back together and then weld the axle spring perch into place, that'll be kind of like a mini gusset. So it's just an added insurance in my mind to help make sure that the axle never has a problem at its cut point. So I marked the original spot on the center of the axle perch, and then I marked my reference point, my new reference point, and then I measured over 1 1/8 inches, and I marked that so I could get ready to start cutting. Using the straight line on the measuring wrap that I used and a straight edge, I marked a parallel line on the axle tube so that I could use that line afterwards, after I cut the axle and narrow it, so I could properly index the axle ends to get the brakes and everything to go back in the right direction. Next up, I put small nicks into the axle tube so that even if the paint marks disappeared, I could see those little cuts in the tube to know where my reference points and everything was after I got done cutting and narrowing the axle. All right, y'all, so now I got the axle ends cut off. I'm gonna get these beveled up and cleaned up and get the alignment tool so that I can weld the ends on. But before I do that, I'm actually gonna clean this axle up and weld the housing to the axle tubes. And I'm gonna do that on a different video so I can keep these videos one subject per video. So I'm gonna get all that cleaned up, set my table up, set the welder up so I can do that. And then I'm gonna get back on to finishing this up because this is another step of adding heat into this axle. So the alignment tool will take up any slack and help me align the axle back up when I get the ends put on. So I'm about to do that, and I'm going to film that on another video. So if y'all are interested in watching me weld a housing to the axle tubes, be sure to check that out. But for y'all that are want a narrow rear end, y'all get to see the rest of that at the end of this seam change. All right, y'all, so I got the center section welded to the axle ends, and I did make a full video on that, so be sure to check that out. But now that I got all that wrapped up and the axle is back cold enough I can actually mess with it, it's time to weld on the axle ends. And I know you're wondering, how do you line up the axle ends to match back up to factory spec? Because, you know, the wheel bearings, the axle shafts, they all have to run in line so you don't have any kind of alignment issues or have any weird or bad bearing wear on your wheel bearings or on your differential. And when you get stuff, you get it off just doesn't take much. You can cause all kind of damage inside your differential, your carrier, wheel bearings, everything, and including, you know, that messes with your brake alignment, tire alignment, all that. So I have a really nice tool that will help me align this axle. And this tool comes from a Mittler Brothers, and it is a rear axle alignment tool for narrowing axles. And it comes with a 72-inch long bar. They have a 60-inch version. I bought the 72-inch because I mostly deal with full-size vehicles, so I wanted the full length so I could work on a larger variety of axles. And it also comes with alignment pucks that go into the carrier bearing pocket as well as into the wheel bearing pockets on the end of the axle tubes. So you slide the alignment bar through the center, put the correct pucks in, alignment pucks for your carrier and your wheel bearings, and that will allow you to line everything up so it's all squared up. The ends are squared up with your bearing caps. So then you can weld your ends on and have everything lined up. So now that you see that neat little tool, let's actually put it into use and get these ends on, welded on, so I can move on to the next part of this build. So let's get started. First, put the opposite carrier puck into place, and then slide the shaft into the axle housing. And then you can slide the first carrier puck onto the shaft, and then align it in where the carrier bearing would go. And once you get it slid into place, slide the shaft through the other carrier puck and out the other end of the housing. All right, so with the alignment shaft in place, I have the carrier bearing alignment pucks installed. Now it's time to put the axle end on the end of the shaft here. So it lines up like that, and this is the axle wheel bearing alignment puck. And the strange thing is, this being an aftermarket kit with a whole variety of alignment pucks, I didn't do my due diligence and look to see if it had the correct wheel bearing pucks for a truck 10 bolt, which is a 2.79 inside diameter wheel bearing pocket. It came with a 2.89 wheel bearing puck, which is, too large to fit in the wheel bearing puck, in the wheel bearing pocket of the axle end. So I look on their website to see, because they have some other pieces that don't come with the kit, and there's the correct wheel bearing pucks for this axle are nowhere to be found on their website. So I took the opportunity to play with my machining skills and machine this down to the right size to fit, and I will be ordering the correct size so that when I build to see what size this was, a small 9-inch, 8-inch Ford, or a 10-bolt car. So it's always interesting how the trucks in this era, or the older era, ended up with smaller bearings than the cars did. I guess they figured since they was going to be drag racing cars, they needed more than trucks that towed weight. Whatever. Anyways, so this lines up on the shaft here, fits into the bearing pocket, and it's nice and tight inside there. And you line with the marks I made on the tube, and turn it to where it lines up. And when this all lines up, and you have the bearing pocket stuff squared up, with all of this squared up, if everything lines up, you can move on to tack welding this into place, and then do your process of welding this and being careful with how you weld it. But I'll show you the problem that I have, and I'm going to have to correct it. So let's move to camera and I'll show you what I'm dealing with. All right, so I have a little bit of an issue with lining up my axle. Because of the heating and welding process that I did, welding the housing to the tube, or since I didn't check alignment before I ever done this step, I don't know what would have caused, but both axle tubes are actually bowed just a little bit out of alignment, which isn't a problem. You can heat and quench them to get them back in line. But because I have the axle end cut off, when I line this part up here, get everything lined up, the bearing pocket and stuff square to where the bearing would run true on the shaft, this will not line up quite right. So you have the tube running, and instead of meeting perfectly in line, it meets just a hair off, which will cause, not only will it be noticeable that you will see the tube go up, meet a weld joint, and go down, but it causes alignment issues on all of the shock brackets, loose spring mounts, everything will be off. So what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to line the axle end up to this and weld this together so it will be back to one solid tube. And when I'm done with that, then I will actually put all of this back together, put the bearing cap in place, or the alignment puck for the bearing pocket back in. And if I have to still do a heat and quench to get this axle tube moved back into place, I will do that. And also in the end, I'm going to be welding loose spring purchase here, shock mounts, sway bar mounts. So I'm going to have to continually check the alignment of this axle before I'm all done with it. But I just want to show that. Sometimes with the joys of hot rodding, as I often say when I find issues like this, just gotta keep adapting and overcoming. So I'm about to pull this puck out and get my equipment so I can line this up, get this end welded on, and then we'll line it up the whole thing instead of just trying to line this up. Start off by beveling the ends of the axle. That way you can get a good solid weld. I take a piece of angle iron and I clamp it to the axle tube so it'll cradle the axle end and make sure everything's good and square, and then clamp it down. Next, slide the axle tube end into place and align the alignment markings you made earlier. Make sure those are in line and get everything squared up, and then you can clamp it on with another C-clamp. Once I got the end clamped into place, I used a straight edge in a couple different places to make sure that everything was aligned. Once the axle end is clamped into place and everything's lined up, then you can start making your tacks so you can start to weld the axle. Make your tacks as far apart as you can so that the tack welds won't start trying to pull the axle end off center, and that'll help you so you can keep everything in line. And once I start welding the axle, I try to rotate it about 180 degrees after every weld to keep the heat on the opposite side of the axle tube. And once you get 4 welds on there, then you're really just filling in gaps as you spin it around, trying to keep the heat as far away as you can. All right, y'all, so I got the axle ends welded onto the tubes. And as I said earlier, I wanted the ends lined up with the tube since, you know, when I lined this up, it was obvious that I had a misalignment issue. So now that I got this square and straight, as you can see, I do have an alignment issue. Through the heating process of welding the center section to the tubes, I put a little bit of a bow into this axle housing, and this gives me a perfect opportunity to explain what this Mittler Brothers axle alignment tool can and cannot do. This is an alignment tool. This isn't a welding jig. You cannot use this alignment tool as a jig to make this stay straight. This is just simply to align everything up to where your wheel bearing pockets and your carrier bearings are all in line and all running true together. So I liken this kind of like a string on a porch. Like if you're building a back porch and you use a string for alignment to make sure all your floor joists are in line. That's the same principle this does, is just make sure that you line all of your boards in line. And just like with welding, if you use this and put this in place, and then you go to welding and you go start welding and get this hot and it bends, it can bow this shaft. And if it bows the shaft, it's no different than you sticking a floor joist in the wrong place and pushing your line out of alignment. Then you just have a floor joist that's out of alignment, because this cannot force it back into alignment. As a test, you can see this right here, it sits, it will not go in because this is too tall to go into here, and I have a gap in the bottom. Well, I could take and just push down like this and slide it into place. So just that little bit of pressure can force this to be off. So any kind of heating and stuff like that can get this off. So if you're just narrowing your axle and you're not dealing with a bent axle tube like this, what I would have done showing you is this is a little bit of slack right here. So this has a slip fit on it. So there's like one or two thou of slack in here, and that slack between this and the shaft, and then this and this, when you put this end on here, you can feel just a little bit of walk. So what you'll be doing is really kind of finding the happy medium of the slack of your axle end. And when you find that happy medium, then you can do your tacks and put a tack, at the top, bottom, one side, the other side, to make sure that this is square. And then you can simply use this as a, like a go, no go gauge. As you're doing your tacks, every time you introduce heat, it draws, and then it'll draw the other way. So as you're tacking with this end, you can hold it in place while you're tacking. But once you start actually putting welds to it, it's good to, as you weld, pull this out, slide it back in. And if it slides back in and goes all the way home easily, it's in line. If this does not go home easily, just a slip fit in and out, you have a warpage problem. So you need to find out a way to get it back straight and not using this. If this binds, you're out of alignment, because you have that much movement you can move around. So that's something I wanted to clarify, and the reason why it didn't work for me, this part didn't work, and I knew it wasn't going to work for that. I knew that this process of welding the housing to the tube is no different than you welding axle brackets, spring perch brackets, 4-link brackets, all those kind of things. Or like a truss that goes across the back of the axle or across the top of the axle. It's the same process. Heat makes warpage, and you have to get it back. So this tool can not only align it when you're narrowing it, it also can help you align it when you get it out of square welding brackets on. So I just wanted to give a clarification on that. But now that I got that out of the way, I'm about to do a heat and quench process to get this axle tube bent back into place, and we'll see how well she lines up. So about to fire the torch up and show you how I do it. Alrighty, y'all. So as you may notice, this axle looks a little bit different than it did when you just saw it. That's because I've actually installed this axle in the truck already. I got the measurements and have final welded the spring perches, the shock mounts, and the sway bar mounts into place. So all of the heating procedures are completed on this axle. And I also cut off the wheel bearing pockets, because this axle is receiving a set of C-clip eliminators, which requires the removal of the wheel bearing pockets, so you can install new bearing pockets on the end of the axle to accept the C-clip eliminators. So it does have enough of the original pocket, the wheel bearing pockets, so that you can check alignment, which is what I'm about to do now. And since everything is done on this axle, this is the best time to check the alignment. So I'm about to do that right now. And yep, this axle shaft here, this side axle tube is off. So I will be doing a heat and quench to move this axle tube back into position. It really doesn't need a whole lot to do it. So I'm gonna look and see just how much and where I need to put some heat at to bow it back into place to line it up. I'm about to check the other side to see how bad it is. And this side is slightly less, and let me look at the angle. So the shaft, the tube is going up this angle, and this tube is going up. So both tubes are actually going up in very similar angles, but it's not very far off. So I'm about to ponder on it, see how much I need to do, and we'll get to work on it. When you're doing a heat and quench procedure, you want to do it on the side of the axle that you're trying to pull the tube towards. So once I decided where I needed the axle to pull towards, I rotated it around to where I could get to it and marked where I wanted to put some heat on it at. And then I grabbed a rosebud on a oxyacetylene torch and proceeded to heat the axle tube. I keep the rosebud moving in the general area where I want the heat to be at, and I got it to a dull cherry red color. That way it's got a good amount of heat in the tube. So when I put the cool water to it, it will draw the tube that direction. Before I started this procedure, I have an ice chest that I filled some wet rags full of ice. That way I can put multiple rags and keep the cold rags coming and keep cooling the axle tube until it's cold to the touch. You may need to do this procedure a few times to get the axle tube to move as far as you need it to move, but be careful because every time you heat and cool metal, you run the risk of having something happen to the metal. So just keep that in mind as you're doing this procedure. All right, y'all, so I know I've taken y'all on a rabbit hole that started off with me wanting to show y'all how to narrow an axle, and also showing off this Mittler Brothers rear axle alignment tool, and it's kind of morphed into a much longer video showing how to narrow the axle and also what to do when you have bent axle tubes. But all of that really kind of works together because this alignment tool, you use it for all of those. If you have a bent axle tube, if you're trying to replace tubes, trying to replace ends, if you're trying to narrow axles, having this tool and having the ability to know where your center of axis is on this whole axle to keep everything running true, I mean, it's something that works for all those. So I figured this video might be long, but at least we were able to use this kit in a variety of measures. And I just got done doing the heat and quench, and I got it really close. It's probably within 10 thou of being perfectly centered on the shaft, But being that this is a used axle and it's had a lot of heating procedures already done on it, and the tubes, to be quite honest, aren't in the best of shape. Coming from Michigan, it has a little bit of rust in the tubes. And when I saw that while I was heating and quenching, I really don't want to continue doing that, because I don't want to cause a problem for a tenth of run out. And that's not so bad that it's going to hurt anything. So I figured we'll stop while we're behind before we get worse. So this axle is good to go, and I will be going ahead and building a ring, installing a ring of pinion, setting that up, and we're gonna paint the axle, get the truck ready to go, and all that kind of stuff. But I hope y'all found this video helpful. At least saw that it's not always perfect, and there's always trials and tribulations when you're trying to work on used parts and trying to do custom work. But I'm really pleased so far with this Mittler Brothers tool. I do wish, however, that I did get the right axle pucks, but with a little machine work, hey, they work anyways. So I'm gonna enjoy using this, and when I get more axles in that doing some narrowing and stuff with, I'll show just if I'm just going to do a narrowing and not trying to do this and all these other procedures. I'll probably do another video just showing how to line this up, see how that works. But I hope y'all enjoyed this video, and if you did, make sure you hit like, subscribe, and keep on coming back right here to Alliecat Customs.